The Teachings of Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi in his own words, edited by Arthur Osborne, Sri Ramanasram Tiruvannamalai 2002. Copyright Sri Ramanasram Tiruvannamalai 7th edition 8th edition 1996 copies 5,000 2002 copies 3,000 price. Rs. CC number 1062 ISBN 8188018155 published by V.S. Ramanan President, Board of Trustees Sri Ramanasram Tiruvannamalai 606,603 Tamil Nadu India Telephone 914175-237292 237200 Telephone, Fax 914175-237491 Email ashram@ramana-maharshi.org. Website ramana-maharshi.org. Published also by Messrs. Ryder and Company, London, England, for sale outside India. Designed and typeset at Sri Ramanasram, printed by Kartik Printers, Chennai 600015. Preface. During the half-century and more of his life at Tiruvannamalai, Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi was visited by a constant stream of people from all parts of India, and by many from the West, seeking spiritual guidance, or consolation in grief, or simply the experience of his presence. He wrote very little all these years, but a number of records of his talks with visitors were kept and subsequently published by his ashram. These are mostly in diary form, with little arrangement according to subject. The purpose of the present book is to build up a general exposition of the Maharshi's teachings by selecting and fitting together passages from these dialogues and from his writings, published as the collected works of Sri Ramana Maharshi, by Messrs. Ryder and Company, in England, and by Sri Ramanasram in India. The editor's comments have been kept to a minimum and are printed in smaller type to distinguish them clearly from the Maharshi's own words. No distinction is made between the periods at which the Maharshi made any statement, and none is needed, for he was not a philosopher working out a system but a realized man speaking from direct knowledge. It sometimes happens that one who is on a spiritual path, or even who has not yet begun consciously seeking, has a glimpse of realization during which, for a brief eternity, he experiences absolute certainty of his divine, immutable, universal self. Such an experience came to the Maharshi when he was a lad of 16. He himself has described it. It was about 6 weeks before I left Madurai for good that the great change in my life took place. It was quite sudden. I was sitting alone in a room on the first floor of my uncle's house. I seldom had any sickness, and on that day there was nothing wrong with my health, but a sudden violent fear of death overtook me. There was nothing in my state of health to account for it, and I did not try to account for it or to find out whether there was any reason for the fear. I just felt, I am going to die, and began thinking what to do about it. It did not occur to me to consult a doctor, or my elders or friends. I felt that I had to solve the problem myself, there and then. The shock of the fear of death drove my mind inwards, and I said to myself mentally, without actually framing the words, "Now death has come. What does it mean? What is it that is dying? The body dies." And I at once dramatized the occurrence of death. I lay with my limbs stretched out stiff as though rigor mortis had set in, and imitated a corpse so as to give greater reality to the enquiry. I held my breath and kept my lips tightly closed so that no sound could escape, so that neither the word, "I," nor any other word could be uttered. Well then, I said to myself, this body is dead. It will be carried stiff to the burning ground and there burnt and reduced to ashes. But with the death of this body am I dead? Is the body I? It is silent and inert, but I feel the full force of my personality and even the voice of the I within me, apart from it. So I am spirit transcending the body. The body dies, but the spirit that transcends it cannot be touched by death. That means I am the deathless spirit. All this was not dull thought. It flashed through me vividly as living truth which I perceived directly, almost without thought process. I was something very real, the only real thing about my present state, and all the conscious activity connected with my body was centered on that T. From that moment onwards the I, or self, focused attention on itself by a powerful fascination. Fear of death had vanished once and for all. Absorption in the self continued unbroken from that time on. 1. RM, pp. 8-10, 1. V. It is the last sentence that is the most remarkable, because usually such an experience soon passes, although the impression of certainty that it leaves on the mind is never afterwards forgotten. Very rare are the cases when it remains permanent, leaving a man thenceforth in constant identity with the universal self. Such a one was the Maharshi. Soon after this change occurred, the youth who was later to be known as the Maharshi left home as a sadhu. He made his way to Tiruvannamalai, the town at the foot of the holy hill of Arunachala, and remained there for the rest of his life. For a while he sat immersed in divine bliss, not speaking, scarcely eating, utterly neglecting the body he no longer needed. Gradually, however, devotees gathered around him and, for their sake, he returned to an outwardly normal life. Many of them, craving instruction, brought him books to read and expound, and he thus became learned almost by accident, neither seeking nor valuing learning. The ancient teaching of non-duality that he thus acquired merely formalized what he had already realized. He has explained this himself. I had read no books except the Periyapuranam, the Bible, and bits of Thayamanavar or Thavaram. My conception of Ishwara was similar to that found in the Puranas. I had never heard of Brahman, Samsara, and so forth. I did not yet know that there was an essence or impersonal real underlying everything, and that Ishwara and I were both identical with it. Later at Tiruvannamalai, as I listened to the Rabu Gita and other sacred books, I learned all this and found that the books were analyzing and naming what I had felt intuitively without analysis or name. 1. RM, page 16, 1. V. Perhaps something should be said about the Maharshi's way of answering questions. There was nothing heavy or pontifical about it. He spoke freely and his replies were often given with laughter and humor. If the questioner was not satisfied, he was free to object or ask further questions. It has been said that the Maharshi taught in silence, but this does not mean that he gave no verbal expositions, only that these were not the essential teaching. That was experienced as a silent influence in the heart. The power of his presence was overwhelming and his beauty indescribable, and yet, at the same time, he was utterly simple, utterly natural, unassuming, unpretentious, unaffected. For the sake of uniformity, the questioner has been referred to in the dialogues in this book as D, standing for devotee, except in cases where the name is given or where for some reason, the word, devotee, would not apply. The Maharshi has been referred to as B, standing for Bhagavan, since it was usual to address him by this name and in the third person. Actually, it is a word commonly used to mean God, but it is used also in those rare cases where a man is felt to be, as Christ put it, one with the Father. It is the same as the name for the Buddha, commonly translated into English as the Blessed One. So far as is possible, Sanskrit words have been avoided, and it usually has been possible. The purpose of this is to make the book easier to read, and also to avoid giving the false impression that the quest of self-realization is some intricate science, which can be understood only with a knowledge of Sanskrit terminology. It is true that there are spiritual sciences which have a necessary technical terminology, but they are more indirect. The clear and simple truth of non-duality which Bhagavan taught, and the direct path of self-enquiry which he V enjoined, can be expounded in simple language, and indeed, he himself expounded them so to Western visitors, without having recourse to Sanskrit terminology. In the rare cases where a Sanskrit term has seemed necessary or useful in this book, its approximate meaning has been indicated in brackets, so that no glossary is necessary. It may also be remarked that the English words, enlightenment, liberation, and self-realization have all been used with the same meaning, to correspond with the Sanskrit words jnana, moksha and mukti. In pi aces where the English of the source quoted seemed infelicitous, it has been altered. This implies no infidelity to the text since the replies were mostly given in Tamil or other South Indian languages, and later rendered into English. The meaning has not been changed. Arthur Osborne. List of abbreviations T. Talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi D.D. Day by Day with Bhagavan by Devaraja Mudaliar, 5th edition, 2002, M.G. Maharshi's Gospel, 12th edition, 2000, S.D.B. Sad Darshana Bhashya R.M. Ramana Maharshi and the Path of Self-Knowledge by Arthur Osborne, 2nd edition, 2002, W. Who Am I? S.E. Self-Enquiry S.I. Spiritual Instruction E.I. Essence of Instruction F.V. 40 verses F.V.S. Supplementary 40 verses reference numbers refer to page numbers except with Essence of Instruction, 40 verses, and Supplement, in which they refer to the number of the verses, and Talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi, in which they refer to the serial number of the talks. Contents page Preface. M. List of abbreviations 1. V. Contents. Ix Chapter 1 The Basic Theory, 1. Chapter 2 From Theory to Practice. 59 Chapter 3 Life in the World. 72 Chapter 4 The Guru. 91 Chapter versus Self-Enquiry. 109 Chapter 6 Other Methods. 141 Chapter 7 The Goal. 179 Index. 205. Chapter 1 The Basic Theory. Readers of the philosophical turn of mind may find it strange to see the first chapter of this work entitled, The Basic Theory. It may appear to them that the whole work should be devoted to theory. In fact, however, the Maharshi, like every spiritual master, was concerned rather with the practical work of training aspirants than with expounding theory. The theory had importance, but only as a basis for practice. D. Buddha is said to have ignored questions about God. B. Yes, and because of this he has been called an agnostic. In fact, Buddha was concerned with guiding the seeker to realize bliss here and now, rather than with academic discussions about God and so forth. 1. D. Is the study of science, psychology, physiology, etc. helpful for attaining yoga liberation or for intuitive understanding of the unity of reality? B. Very little. Some theoretical knowledge is needed for yoga and may be found in books, but practical application is what is needed. Personal example and instruction are the most helpful aids. As for intuitive understanding, a person may laboriously convince himself of the truth to be grasped by intuition, of its function and nature, but the actual intuition is more like feeling and requires practical and personal contact. Mere book learning is not of any great mg, page 42, 1. 2. Use. After realization all intellectual loads are useless burdens and are to be thrown overboard. 1. Preoccupation with theory, doctrine and philosophy can actually be harmful, insofar as it distracts a man from the really important work of spiritual effort, by offering an easier alternative which is merely mental, and which therefore cannot change his nature. What use is the learning of those who do not seek to wipe out the letters of destiny from their brow, by inquiring, whence is the birth of us who know the letters? They have sunk to the level of a gramophone. What else are they, O Arunachala? It is those who are not learned that are saved rather than those whose ego has not yet subsided in spite of their learning. The unlearned are saved from the relentless grip of the devil of self-infatuation. They are saved from the malady of a myriad whirling thoughts and words. They are saved from running after wealth. It is from more than one evil that they are saved. Point 2. Similarly, he had no use for theoretical discussions. It is due to illusion born of ignorance that men fail to recognize that which is always and for everybody the inherent reality dwelling in its natural heart center and to abide in it, and that instead they argue that it exists or does not exist, that it has form or has not form, or is non-dual or is dual. Point 3. Can anything appear apart from that which is eternal and perfect? This kind of dispute is endless. Do not engage in it. 1. T. 28. 2. FVS. 35, 36. 3 FV. 34. 3. Instead, turn your mind inward and put an end to all this. There is no finality in disputations. Point 1. Ultimately, even the scriptures are useless. The scriptures serve to indicate the existence of the higher power or self and to point the way to it. That is their essential purpose. Apart from that, they are useless. However, they are voluminous, in order to be adapted to the level of development of every seeker. As a man rises in the scale, he finds the stages already attained to be only stepping stones to higher stages, until finally the goal is reached. When that happens, the goal alone remains and everything else, including the scriptures, become useless. Point 2. Sometimes, it is true, he expounded philosophy in all its intricacies, but only as a concession to weakness, to those addicted to much thinking, as he put it in Self-Enquiry. I had thought of quoting such an explanation here, but found that it contained the passage. The intricate maze of philosophy of the various schools is said to clarify matters and to reveal the truth, but in fact it creates confusion where none need exist. To understand anything there must be the self. The self is obvious, so why not remain as the self? What need to explain the non-self? And of himself he adds, I was indeed fortunate that I never took to it, i.e. philosophy. Had I taken to it I would probably be nowhere, but my inherent tendencies led me directly to inquire, who am I? How fortunate. 3 T. 132. 2. T. 63. 3. T. 392. 4. The world. Real or illusion? Nevertheless, some theoretical teaching is necessary as the basis for the practical work of spiritual training. With the Maharshi this took the form of non-duality, in complete accordance with the teachings of the great sage, Shankara. The agreement does not, however, mean that Bhagavan was, as a philosopher would put it, influenced by Shankara, merely that the recognized Shankara's teaching as a true exposition of what he had realized and knew by direct knowledge. D. Is Bhagavan's teaching the same as Shankara's? B. Bhagavan's teaching is an expression of his own experience and realization. Others find that it tallies with Sri Shankara's. Point 1. D. When the Upanishads say that all is Brahman, how can we agree with Shankara that this world is illusory? B. Shankara also said that this world is Brahman or the self. What he objected to is one's imagining that the self is limited by the names and forms that constitute the world. He only said that the world has no reality apart from Brahman. Brahman or the self is like a cinema screen and the world like the pictures on it. You can see the picture only so long as there is a screen. But when the observer himself becomes the screen, only the self remains. Point 2. Shankara has been criticized for his philosophy of Maya, illusion, without understanding his meaning. He made 3 statements. That Brahman is real, that the universe is unreal, and that Brahman is the universe. He did not stop with the second. The third statement explains the first 2, it signifies 1 T. 189. 2. DD, page 238. 5. That when the universe is perceived apart from Brahman, that perception is false and illusory. What it amounts to is that phenomena are real when experienced as the self and illusory when seen apart from the self. Point 1. The self alone exists and is real. The world, the individual and God are, like the illusory appearance of silver in the mother of pearl, imaginary creations in the self. Point 2. They appear and disappear simultaneously. Actually, the self alone is the world, the T in God. All that exists is only a manifestation of the Supreme. Point 3. D. What is reality? B. Reality must always be real. It has no names or forms but is what underlies them. It underlies all limitations, being itself limitless. It is not bound in any way. It underlies unrealities, being itself real. It is that which is. It is as it is. It transcends speech and is beyond description such as being or non-being. Point 4. He would not be entangled in apparent disagreements due merely to a different viewpoint or mode of expression. D. The Buddhists deny the world whereas Hindu philosophy admits its existence but calls it unreal, isn't that so? B. It is only a difference of point of view. D. They say that the world is created by divine energy, Shakti. Is the knowledge of unreality due to the veiling by illusion, Maya? 1 RM, page 92. 2. As will appear later, this does not in fact imply atheism, any more than the previous quotation implies pantheism. In fact, labels are not much use in trying to understand what is not a system of philosophy but a theoretical basis for spiritual effort. 3. W. Section 16. 4. T. 140. 6b. All admit creation by the divine energy, but what is the nature of this energy? It must be in conformity with the nature of its creation. D. Are there degrees of illusion? B. Illusion itself is illusory, it must be seen by somebody outside it, but how can such a seer be subject to it? So, how can he speak of degrees of it? You see various scenes passing on a cinema screen. Fire seems to burn buildings to ashes. Water seems to wreck ships. But the screen on which the pictures are projected remains unburnt and dry. Why? Because the pictures are unreal and the screen real. Similarly, reflections pass through a mirror, but it is not affected at all by their number or quality. In the same way, the world is a phenomenon upon the substratum of the single reality which is not affected by it in any way. Reality is only one. Talk of illusion is due only to the point of view. Change your viewpoint to that of knowledge and you will perceive the universe to be only Brahman. Being now immersed in the world, you see it as a real world. Get beyond it and it will disappear and reality alone will remain. Point 1. As the last excerpt shows, the postulate of one universal reality calls for the conception of a process either of illusion or creation to explain the apparent reality of the world. The world is perceived as an apparent objective reality when the mind is externalized, thereby abandoning its identity with the self. When the world is thus perceived, the true nature t. 446. 1. 7 of the self is not revealed. Conversely, when the self is realized, the world ceases to appear as an objective reality. Point 1. That is illusion which makes one take what is ever-present and all-pervasive, full to perfection and self-luminous, and is indeed the self in the core of one's being, for non-existent and unreal. Conversely, that is illusion which makes one take for real and self-existent what is non-existent and unreal, namely the trilogy of world, ego and God. Point 2. The world is indeed real, but not as an independent, self-subsistent reality, just as a man you see in a dream is real as a dream figure but not as a man. To those who have not realized the self as well as to those who have, the world is real. But to the former, truth is adapted to the form of the world, whereas to the latter truth shines as the formless perfection and the substratum of the world. This is the only difference between them. Point 3. As I recalled Bhagavan saying sometimes that unreal, mithya, imaginary, and real, satam, mean the same, but did not quite understand, I asked him about it. He said, yes, I do sometimes say that. What do you mean by real? What is it that you call real? I answered. According to Vedanta, only that which is permanent and unchanging can be called real. That is the meaning of reality. Then Bhagavan said, the names and forms which constitute the world continually change and perish and are therefore called unreal. It is unreal, imaginary, to limit the self. 1W, section 8, 2. SL, chap. 2, section 5, 3. FV, 18. 8 to these names and forms, and real to regard all as the self. The non-dualist says that the world is unreal, but he also says, all this is Brahman. So it is clear that what he condemns is, regarding the world as objectively real in itself, not regarding it as Brahman. He who sees the self alone in the world also. It is immaterial to the enlightened whether the world appears or not. In either case, his attention is turned to the self. It is like the letters and the paper on which they are printed. You are so engrossed in the letters that you forget about the paper, but the enlightened sees the paper as the substratum whether the letters appear on it or not. Point 1. This is still more succinctly stated as follows. The Vedantins do not say that the world is unreal. That is a misunderstanding. If they did, what would be the meaning of the Vedantic text? All this is Brahman. They only mean that the world is unreal as world but real as self. If you regard the world as non-self, it is not real. Everything, whether you call it illusion, maya, or divine play, lila, or energy, shakti, must be within the self and not apart from it. Point 2. Before leaving the theory of RHE world as a manifestation of the self, devoid of objective reality, it must be stressed once again that theory had importance for the Maharshi only insofar as it helped a man's spiritual development, not for its own sake. Cosmology as understood in modern physical science simply did not concern him. D. The Vedas contain conflicting accounts of cosmogony. Ether is said to be the first creation in one place, vital energy in another, water in another, something else in one. dd. pp. 307-8. 2. D.
Д. П. 269.
9 another. How can all this be reconciled? Does it not impair the credibility of the Vedas? B. Different seers saw different aspects of truth at different times, each emphasizing some viewpoint. Why do you worry about their conflicting statements? The essential aim of the Vedas is to teach us the nature of the imperishable self and show us that we are that. D. About that part 1 I'm satisfied. B. Then treat all the rest as auxiliary arguments or as expositions for the ignorant who want to know the origin of things. Point 1. Major Chadwick was copying out the English translation of the Tamil Kaivalya Navanitha when he came across some of the technical terms in it which he had difficulty in understanding. He accordingly asked Bhagavan about them, and Bhagavan replied, these portions deal with theories of creation. They are not essential because the real purpose of the scriptures is not to set forth such theories. They mention the theories casually, so that those readers who wish to, may take interest in them. The truth is that the world appears as a passing shadow in a flood of light. Light is necessary even to see the shadow. The shadow is not worth any special study, analysis or discussion. The purpose of the book is to deal with the self, and what is said about creation may be omitted for the present. Later, Sri Bhagavan continued. Vedanta says that the cosmos springs into view simultaneously with him who sees it, and there is no detailed process of creation. It is similar to a dream where he who experiences the dream arises simultaneously with the dream he experiences. However, some people cling so fast to objective knowledge that they are not satisfied when told this. They want to know how sudden creation can be possible and argue that an effect must be preceded by cause. In fact, they desire an explanation of the world that they see about them. Therefore, the scriptures try to satisfy their curiosity by such theories. This method of dealing with the subject is called the theory of gradual creation, but the true spiritual seeker can be satisfied with instantaneous creation. 1. The nature of man. We come now to the very essence of theory, the nature of man himself. For whatever a man may think of RHE reality of the world or of God, he knows that he himself exists. And it is in order to understand and at the same time to perfect himself that he studies and seeks guidance. The individual being which identifies its existence with that of the life in the physical body as I is called the ego. The self, which is pure consciousness, has no ego sense about it. Neither can the physical body, which is inert in itself, have this ego sense. Between the two, that is between the self or pure consciousness and the inert physical body, there arises mysteriously the ego sense or I notion, the hybrid which is neither of them, and this flourishes as an individual being. This ego or individual being is at the root of all that is futile and undesirable in life. Therefore it is to be destroyed by any possible means, then that which ever is alone remains resplendent. This is liberation or enlightenment or self-realization. Point 2. 1t, 651, 2. Si, Chap. 1, Section 12. 11d. Bhagavan often says, the world is not outside you, or everything depends on you, or what is there outside you? I find all this puzzling. The world existed before I was born and will continue to exist after my death, as it has survived the death of so many who once lived as I do now. B. Did I ever say that the world exists because of you? I have only put to you the question, what exists apart from yourself? You ought to understand that by the self neither the physical body nor the subtle body is meant. What you are told is that if you once know the self within which all ideas exist, not excluding the idea of yourself, of others like you and of the world, you can realize the truth that there is a reality, a supreme truth which is the self of all the world you now see, the self of all the selves, the one real, the supreme, the eternal self, as distinct from the ego or individual being, which is impermanent. You must not mistake the ego or the bodily idea for the self. D. Then Bhagavan means that the self is God? And in his next reply Bhagavan, as was his way, turned the discussion from theory to practice. Although the present chapter is, on the whole, devoted to theory, it seems appropriate to continue the dialogue so as to show how the theory was put to practical use. B. You see the difficulty. Self-enquiry, who am I, is a different technique from the meditation, I am Shiva, or I am he. I rather emphasize self-knowledge, for you are first concerned with yourself before you proceed to know the world or its Lord. The I am he, or I am Brahman, meditation is more or less mental, but the quest for the self of which I speak is a direct method and is superior to it. For, the moment you get into the quest for the self and begin to go deeper, the 12 real self is waiting there to receive you, and then whatever is to be done is done by something else, and you, as an individual, have no hand in it. In this process all doubts and discussions are automatically given up, just as one who sleeps forgets all his cares for the time being. The further discussion illustrates the freedom of argument that Bhagavan allowed to those who were not convinced by a reply. D. What certainty is there that something awaits there to receive me? B. When a person is sufficiently mature he becomes convinced naturally. D. How is this maturity to be attained? B. Various ways are prescribed. But whatever previous development there may be, earnest self-enquiry hastens it. D. That is arguing in a circle. I am strong enough for the quest if I am mature, and it is the quest that makes me mature. This is an objection that was often raised in one form or another, and the reply to it again emphasizes that it is not theory that is needed, but practice. B. The mind does have this sort of difficulty. It wants a fixed theory to satisfy itself with. Really, however, no theory is necessary for the man who seriously strives to approach God or his true self. Point 1. Everyone is the self and indeed is infinite. Yet each person mistakes his body for his self. In order to know anything, illumination is necessary. This can only be of the nature of light, however, it lights up both physical light and physical darkness. That is to say, that it lies beyond apparent light and darkness. It is itself neither, but it is said to be light because it illumines ISDB, v. Ix. 13 both. It is infinite and is consciousness. Consciousness is the self of which everyone is aware. No one is ever away from the self, and therefore everyone is in fact self-realized. Only, and this is the great mystery, people do not know this and want to realize the self. Realization consists only in getting rid of the false idea that one is not realized. It is not anything new to be acquired. It must already exist or it would not be eternal, and only what is eternal is worth striving for. Once the false notion, I am the body, or I am not realized, has been removed. Supreme consciousness or the self alone remains, and in people's present state of knowledge they call this realization. But the truth is that realization is eternal and already exists, here and now. 1. Consciousness is pure knowledge. The mind arises out of it and is made up of thoughts. Point 2. The essence of the mind is only awareness or consciousness. However, when the ego overclouds it, it functions as reasoning, thinking or perceiving. The universal mind, not being limited by the ego, has nothing outside itself and is therefore only aware. This is what the Bible means by, I am that I am. 3. The ego-ridden mind has its strength sapped and is too weak to resist distressing thoughts. The egoless mind is happy, as we see in deep, dreamless sleep. Clearly, therefore, happiness and distress are only modes of the mind. Point 4. D. When I see the I see nothing. B. You say that because you are accustomed to identify yourself with the body and sight with the eyes, but what is there? 1 T. 482. 2. T. 589. 3. Exodus 3. 14. 4. T. 188. 14 To be seen, and by whom, and how? There is only one consciousness in this, when it identifies itself with the body, projects itself through the eyes and sees the surrounding objects. The individual is limited to the waking state. He expects to see something different and accepts the authority of his senses. He will not admit that he who sees, the objects seen, and the act of seeing are all manifestations of the same consciousness. The I meditation helps to overcome the illusion that the self is something to see. Actually, there is nothing to see. How do you recognize yourself now? Do you have to hold a mirror up in front of yourself to recognize yourself? The awareness is itself the T. Realize it, and that is the truth. D. When I inquire into the origin of thoughts, there is the perception of the I, but it does not satisfy me. B. Quite right. Because this perception of I is associated with a form, perhaps with the physical body. Nothing should be associated with the pure self. The self is the pure reality in whose light the body, the ego and all else shine. When all thoughts are stilled, pure consciousness remains over. Point 1. D. How did the ego arise? Here is a question that gives rise to endless philosophizing, but Bhagavan, holding rigorously to the truth of non-duality, refused to admit its existence. B. There is no ego. If there were, you would have to admit of two selves in you. Therefore there is no ignorance. If you inquire into the self, ignorance, which is already non-existent, will be found not to exist, and you will say that it has fled. Point 2. 1 T. 196. 2. T. 363. 15 Sometimes it seemed to the listener that absence of thought must mean a mere blank, and therefore Bhagavan specifically guarded against this. Absence of thought does not mean a blank. There must be someone to be aware of that blank. Knowledge and ignorance pertain only to the mind and are in duality, but the self is beyond them both. It is pure light. There is no need for one self to see another. There are no two selves. What is not the self is mere non-self and cannot see the self. The self has no sight or hearing. It lies beyond them, all alone, as pure consciousness. Point 1. Bhagavan often cited man's continued existence during deep, dreamless sleep as a proof that he exists independent of the ego and the body sense. He also referred to the state of deep sleep as a body-free and ego-free state. D. I don't know whether the self is different from the ego. B. In what state were you in deep sleep? D. I don't know. B. Who doesn't know? The waking self? But you don't deny that you existed while in deep sleep? D. I was in him, but I don't know who was in deep sleep. B. Exactly. The waking man says that he did not know anything in the state of deep sleep. Now he sees objects and knows that he exists, but in deep sleep there were no objects and no spectator. And yet the same person who is speaking now existed in deep sleep also. What is the difference between the two states? There are objects in the play of the senses now, while in deep sleep there were not. A new entity, the ego, has arisen. It acts through the senses, sees objects, confuses itself with the body and claims to be the self. In T. 245, I. 16 Reality, what was in deep sleep continues to be now also. The self is changeless. It is the ego which has come between. That which rises and sets is the ego. That which remains changeless is the self. Point 1. Such examples sometimes gave rise to the mistaken idea that the state of realization or abidance in the self which Bhagavan prescribed was a state of any science like physical sleep, and therefore he guarded against this idea also. B. Waking, dream and sleep are mere phases of the mind, not of the self. The self is the witness of these three states. Your true nature exists in sleep. D. But we are advised not to fall asleep during meditation. B. It is stupor which you must guard against. That sleep which alternates with waking is not the true sleep. That waking which alternates with sleep is not the true waking. Are you awake now? Know what you have to do is to wake up to your true state. You should neither fall into false sleep nor remain falsely awake. Point 2. B. Though present even in sleep, the self is not then perceived. It cannot be known in sleep straightaway. It must first be realized in the waking state, for it is our true nature underlying all the three states. Effort must be made in the waking state and the self realized here and now. It will then be understood to be the continuous self uninterrupted by the alteration of waking, dream and deep sleep. Point 3. In fact, one name for the true state of realized being is the fourth state, existing eternally beyond the three states of waking, dream and deep sleep. It is compared with the state of deep sleep since, like this, it is formless and non-dual. However, as the above quotation shows, it is far from being the same. In the fourth state the ego merges in consciousness, as in sleep it does in unconsciousness. 1. T. 143. 2. T. 495. 3. T. 307. 17. Death and rebirth in nothing. Did Bhagavan show more clearly that theory has to be adapted to the understanding of the seeker than in the question of death and rebirth? For those who were capable of grasping pure, non-dual theory, he explained merely that the question does not arise, for if the ego has no real existence, now, it has none after death either. D. Do a person's actions in this life affect him in future births? B. Are you born now? Why do you think of future births? The truth is that there is neither birth nor death. Let him who is born think of death and palliatives for it. 1. D. Is the Hindu doctrine of reincarnation right? B. No definite answer is possible. Even the present incarnation is denied, for instance in the Bhagavad Gita. D. Isn't our personality beginningless? B. Find out first whether it exists at all, and after you have solved that problem, ask the question. Namalwar says, in ignorance, I took the ego to be the self, but with right knowledge the ego is not and only you remain as the self. Both the non-dualists and the dualists agree on the necessity for self-realization. Attain that first and then raise other questions. Non-dualism or dualism cannot be decided on theoretical grounds alone. If the self is realized, the question will not arise. 2. Whatever is born must die. Whatever is acquired must be lost, but were you born? You are eternally existent. The self can never be lost. 3. 1 T. 17. 2. T. 491. 3. T. 20. 18. Bhagavan, indeed, discouraged preoccupation with such questions since they merely distract one from the real task of realizing the self here and now. D. They say that we have the choice of enjoying merit or demerit after our death, that it depends on our choice which comes. Is that so? B. Why raise questions of what happens after death? Why ask whether you were born, whether you are reaping the fruits of your past karma, and so on? You will not raise such questions in a little while when you fall asleep. Why? Are you a different person now from the one you were when asleep? No, you are not. Find out why such questions do not occur to you when you are asleep. 1. On occasion, however, Bhagavan did admit of a lower, contingent point of view for those who could not hold to the doctrine of pure non-dualism. In the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna first says to Arjuna in chapter 2, that no one was born, and then in chapter 4, there have been numerous incarnations both of you and me. I know them but you do not. Which of these two statements is true? The teaching varies according to the understanding of the listener. 2. When Arjuna said that he would not fight against his relatives and elders in order to kill them and gain the kingdom, Sri Krishna said, not that these, you or I, were not before, are not now, nor will be hereafter. None was born, none has died, nor will it be so hereafter. He further developed this theme, saying that he had given instructions to the sun and through him to Ikshvaku. And Arjuna queried how that could be, since 1 T. 242, 2 T. 436, 19 he had been born only a few years back, while they lived ages ago. Then Sri Krishna saw his point of view and said, yes, there have been many incarnations of me and you. I know them all but you do not. Such statements appear contradictory, but they are true according to the viewpoint of the questioner. Christ also said, before Abraham was, I am. 1 Just as in dreams, you wake up after several new experiences, so after death another body is found. 2. Just as rivers lose their individuality when they discharge their waters into the ocean, and yet the waters evaporate and return as rain on the hills and back again through the rivers to the ocean, so also individuals lose their individuality when they go to sleep but return again according to their previous innate tendencies. Similarly, in death also, being is not lost. D. How can that be? B. See how a tree grows again when its branches are cut off. So long as the life source is not destroyed, it will grow. Similarly, latent potentialities withdraw into the heart at death but do not perish. That is how beings are reborn. 3. Nevertheless, from the higher viewpoint he would say, in truth there is neither seed nor tree, there is only being. 4. He would occasionally explain in more detail, but still with the reservation that in reality there is only the changeless self. D. How long is the interval between death and rebirth? 1 T. 145, 2 T. 144, 3 T. 108, 4 T. 439, 20 B. It may be long or short, but a realized man undergoes no such change. He merges into the infinite being, as is said in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Some say that those who, after death, take the path of light are not reborn, whereas those who take the path of darkness are born after they have reaped their karma, self-made destiny, in their subtle bodies. If a man's merits and demerits are equal, he is reborn immediately on earth. If the merits outweigh the demerits, his subtle body goes first to heaven, while if the demerits outweigh the merits it goes first to hell. But in either case he is later reborn on earth. All this is described in the scriptures, but in fact there is neither birth nor death, one simply remains what one really is. That only is the truth. Point 1. Again, he would explain in terms of God's mercy. b. God in his mercy withholds this knowledge from people. If they knew that they had been virtuous they would grow proud, and in the other case they would be despondent. Both are bad. It is enough to know the self. Point 2. He did, however, refer sometimes to a person's preparedness or maturity as being due to the achievements of a previous incarnation. A competent person who has already, perhaps in a previous incarnation, qualified himself realizes the truth and abides in peace as soon as he hears it told to him just once, whereas one who is not so qualified has to pass through the various stages before attaining samadhi, direct, pure consciousness of being. 3. 1 T. 573, 2. T. 553, 3. T. 21. 21 That is to say that a lifetime may be regarded as a day's journey upon the pilgrimage to self-realization. How far from the goal one starts depends on the effort or lack of effort made on the previous days. How far forward one advances depends on the effort of today. A science lecturer from a university asked whether the intellect survives a man's death and was told, "Why think of death? Consider what happens in your sleep. What is your experience of that?" D. But sleep is transient, whereas death is not. B. Sleep is intermediate between two waking states, and in the same way death is intermediate between two births. Both are transient. D. I mean, when the spirit is disembodied, does it carry the intellect with it? B. The spirit is not disembodied, the bodies differ. If not a gross body it will be a subtle one, as in sleep, dream or day dream. Point 1. Bhagavan would never admit that differences in mode of expression or formulation of doctrine between the various religions signified real contradiction, since the truth to which they point is one and immutable. D. Is the Buddhist view that there is no continuous entity answering to the idea of the individual soul right or not? Is this consistent with the Hindu doctrine of a reincarnating ego? Is the soul a continuous entity which reincarnates again and again, according to the Hindu doctrine, or is it a mere conglomeration of mental tendencies? B. The real self is continuous and unaffected. The reincarnating ego belongs to a lower plane, that of thought. It is transcended by self-realization. T. 206. I. 22 Reincarnations are due to a spurious offshoot of being and are therefore denied by the Buddhists. The human state is due to a mingling of the sentient with the insentient. Point 1. Sometimes it was not a question of reincarnation but grieving over the death of a loved one. A lady who had come from North India asked Bhagavan whether it was possible to know the posthumous state of an individual. B. It is possible, but why try? Such facts are only as real as the person who seeks them. L. The birth of a person and his life and death are real to us. B. Because you wrongly identify yourself with the body, you think of the other also as a body. Neither you nor he is the body. L. But from my own level of understanding, I regard myself and my son as real. B. The birth of the T-thought is a person's birth and its death is his death. After the T-thought has arisen, the wrong identification with the body arises. Identifying yourself with the body makes you falsely identify others also with their bodies. Just as your body was born and grows and will die, so you think the other also was born, grew and died. Did you think of your son before he was born? The thought came after his birth and continues even after his death. He is your son only insofar as you think of him. Where has he gone? To the source from which he sprang. So long as you continue to exist, he does too. But if you cease to identify yourself with the body and realize the true self, this confusion will vanish. You are eternal and others also will be found to be eternal. Until this is realized there will always T. 136. I. 23 be grief due to false values which are caused by wrong knowledge and wrong identification. Point 1. On the death of King George V, two devotees were discussing the matter in the hall and seemed upset. Bhagavan said, "What is it to you who dies or is lost? Die yourself and be lost, becoming one with the self of all, on the ego's extinction." Point 2. And finally, about the importance of death. Religions stress the importance of the frame of mind in which a person dies and his last thoughts at death. But Bhagavan reminded people that it is necessary to be well prepared beforehand. If not, undesirable tendencies will rise up at death, too powerful to be controlled. D. Even if I cannot realize in my lifetime, let me at least not forget on my deathbed. Let me have a glimpse of reality at least at the moment of death, so that it may stand me in good stead in the future. B. It is said in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 8, that whatever is a person's last thought at death determines his next birth. But it is necessary to experience reality now, in this life, in order to experience it at death. Consider whether this present moment is any different from the last one at death and try to be in the desired state. Point 3. Heart and head. This seems a suitable place to set forth the Maharshi's teaching about heart and head. He taught that the heart, not the head, is the true seat of consciousness, but by this he did not mean 1 T. 276, 2 T. 236, 3 T. 621, 24 the physical organ at the left side of the chest but the heart at the right, and by consciousness, he did not mean thought but pure awareness or sense of being. He had found this from his own experience to be the center of spiritual awareness and then found his experience confirmed in some ancient texts. When his devotees were instructed to concentrate on the heart, it was this spiritual heart on the right that was referred to, and they also found it the center of an actual, almost physical vibration of awareness. However, he would also speak of the heart as equivalent to the self and remind them that in truth it is not in the body at all, but is spaceless. D. Why do you say that the heart is on the right when biologists have found it to be on the left? What authority have you? B. No one denies that the physical organ is on the left, but the heart of which I speak is on the right. That is my experience and I require no authority for it. Still you can find confirmation of it in a Malayali book on Ayurveda and in the Siddha Upanishad. 1. Saying this, Bhagavan showed the quotation from the latter and quoted the text from the former. Sometimes, when asked, he referred also to the biblical text from Ecclesiastes. The wise man's heart is at the right hand and a fool's heart is at the left. 2. D. Why do we have a place such as the heart to concentrate on for meditation? B. Because you seek true consciousness. Where can you find it? Can you attain it outside yourself? You have to find it internally. Therefore you are directed inward. The heart is the seat of consciousness or consciousness itself. Point 3. I ask you to observe where the I arises in your body, but it is not really quite correct to say that the T arises from and 1 T, 4, 2. Ecclesiastes X, 2, 3. T, 205. 25 merges in the chest at the right side. The heart is another name for reality and this is neither inside nor outside the body. There can be no in or out for it, since it alone is. I do not mean by heart any physiological organ or any plexus or nerves or anything like that. But so long as a man identifies himself with the body or thinks he is in the body, he is advised to see where in the body the T thought arises and merges again. It must be the heart at the right side of the chest, since every man of whatever race and religion and in whatever language he may be speaking, points to the right side of the chest to indicate himself when he says, I. This is so all over the world, so that must be the place. And by keenly watching the emergence of the T thought on waking and its subsidence on going to sleep, one can see that it is in the heart on the right side. Point 1. When a room is dark you need a lamp to light it, but when the sun rises there is no need for a lamp. Objects are seen without one. And to see the sun itself no lamp is needed because it is self-luminous. Similarly with the mind, the reflected light of the mind is necessary to perceive objects, but to see the heart it is enough for the mind to be turned towards it. Then the mind loses itself and the heart shines forth. Point 2. It is a tantric practice to concentrate on one of the chakras or spiritual centers of the body, very often on the point between the eyebrows. As will be shown in a later chapter, the heart on the right side is not one of these chakras. Nevertheless, in the following passage, Bhagavan explains concisely his teaching that concentration on the heart center is more effective than on any other point but less effective than pure enquiry. 1. DD, page 234, 2. T, 99. 26D. There are said to be 6 subtle organs of different colors in the chest, of which the spiritual heart is said to be the one situated 2 fingers breadth, to the right from the center. But the heart is also said to be formless. Does that mean that we should imagine it to have a form and meditate on this? B. No. Only the quest, who am I, is necessary. That which continues to exist throughout sleep and waking is the same being in both, but while waking there is unhappiness and therefore the effort to remove it. When asked who awakes from sleep, you say T. Hold fast to this, I. If that is done the eternal being reveals itself. The most important thing is the investigation of the I, and not concentration on the heart center. There is no such thing as the inner and the outer. Both words mean the same or nothing at all. Nevertheless, there is also the practice of concentration on the heart center, which is a form of spiritual exercise. Only he who concentrates on the heart can remain aware when the mind ceases to be active and remains still, with no thoughts, whereas those who concentrate on any other center cannot retain awareness without thought but only infer that the mind was still after it has become active again. Point 1. In the following passage an English lady remarks on this awareness without thought and Bhagavan approves. D. Thoughts suddenly cease and I rises up equally suddenly and continues. It is only a feeling, not a thought. Can it be right? B. Yes, it is quite right. Thoughts have to cease and reason to disappear for the I to rise up and be felt. Feeling is the main thing, not reason. T. 131. I. 27D. Moreover, it is not in the head, but at the right side of the chest. B. That is where it should be, because the heart is there. D. When I look outwards it disappears. What should I do? B. Hold fast to it. Point 1. This does not mean that thought is impossible during the state of T consciousness, as indeed one can see from the example of Bhagavan himself, who was permanently in that state. For the ignorant person, thought is like a dense cloud overhead, shutting him off from the illumination of the sun. When the ceiling of cloud has been broken and rolled back, letting in the light, he can use thought without being imprisoned by it. To change the metaphor, Bhagavan sometimes compared the mind of the realized man to the moon in the sky in daytime. It is there but its light is not needed, because one can see without it by the direct light of the sun. Suffering. One of the problems about which Bhagavan was often asked was suffering. The questions were usually personal rather than academic, since it was often the experience of grief which drove people to seek solace from him. The real solace came as a silent influence, but he did also answer theoretical questions. The usual answer was to bid the questioner find out who it is that suffers, just as he would bid the doubter find who it is that doubts. For the self is beyond suffering as it is beyond doubt. Sometimes, however, on a more contingent level, he would point out that whatever makes a person dissatisfied with his state of ignorance and turns him to the quest of the self is beneficial, and that it is often suffering which is the means of doing this. T. 24. 1. 28b. The bliss of self is always yours, and you will find it if you seek it earnestly. The cause of your misery is not in your outer life, it is in you, as your ego. You impose limitations on yourself and then make a vain struggle to transcend them. All unhappiness is due to the ego. With it comes all your trouble. What does it avail you to attribute the cause of misery to the happenings of life when that cause is really within you? What happiness can you get from things extraneous to yourself? When you get it, how long will it last? If you would deny the ego and scorch it by ignoring it, you would be free. If you accept it, it will impose limitations on you and throw you into a vain struggle to transcend them. That was how the thief sought to ruin King Janaka. To be the self that you really are is the only means to realize the bliss that is ever yours. 1. A very devoted and simple devotee had lost his only son, a child of 3. The next day he arrived at the ashram with his family. Referring to them, Bhagavan said, "Training of mind helps one to bear sorrows and bereavements with courage, but the loss of one's children is said to be the worst of all griefs. Grief only exists as long as one considers oneself to have a definite form. If the form is transcended, one knows the oneself to be eternal. There is neither death nor birth. What is born is only the body, and this is the creation of the ego. But the ego is not ordinarily perceived without the body and so is identified with it. It is thought that matters. Let the sensible man consider whether he knew his body while in deep sleep. Why, then, does he feel it in the waking state? Although the body was not felt in sleep, did not the self exist? What was his mg, pp. 38-9, 1. 29 state when in deep sleep, and what is it now when awake? What is the difference? The ego rises up and that is waking. Simultaneously thoughts arise. Find out who has the thoughts. Where do they come from? They must arise from the conscious self. Apprehending this even vaguely helps towards the extinction of the ego. The realization of the one infinite existence becomes possible. In that state there are no individuals but only eternal being. Hence there is no thought of death or grieving. If a man thinks that he is born, he cannot escape the fear of death. Let him find out whether he was ever born or whether the self takes birth. He will discover that the self always exists and that the body which is born resolves itself into thought, and that the emergence of thought is the root of all mischief. Find where thought comes from, and then you will abide in the ever-present inmost self and be free from the idea of birth and fear of death. 1. D. If someone we love dies, it causes grief. Should we avoid such grief by either loving all alike or not loving at all? B. If someone we love dies, it causes grief to the one who continues living. The way to get rid of grief is not to continue living. Kill the griever, and who will then remain to grieve? The ego must die. That is the only way. The two alternatives you suggest amount to the same. When all are realized to be the one self, who is there to love or hate? 2. Sometimes, however, the questions were impersonal, referring not to some private tragedy but to the evil and suffering in the world. In such cases they were usually by visitors who did not understand the doctrine of non-duality or follow the path of self-enquiry. 1. T. 80. 2t. 252. 30. Visitor. Widespread distress, such as famine and pestilence, spreads havoc through the world. What is the cause of this state of affairs? B. To whom does all this appear? V. That won't do. I see misery all round. B. You were not conscious of the world and its sufferings while asleep, but you are now that you are awake. Continue in the state in which you are not affected by such things. When you are not aware of the world, that is to say when you remain as the self in the state of sleep, its sufferings do not affect you. Therefore turn inwards and seek the self, and there will be an end both of the world and of its miseries. V. But that is selfishness. B. The world is not external to you. Because you wrongly identify yourself with the body, you see the world outside you and its suffering becomes apparent to you, but the world and its sufferings are not real. Seek the reality and get rid of this unreal feeling. This the visitor was unwilling to do, but instead referred again to suffering and to those who strive vainly to remove it. V. There are great men and public workers who cannot solve the problem of suffering in the world. B. That is because they are based on the ego. If they remained in the self, it would be different. Still, presuming the absolute reality of the objective world, the visitor now asked in an indirect way how it would be different, demanding that those who abide in the self should accept the unreal as real. V. Why don't Mahatmas help? For the moment, Bhagavan answers on the visitor's own level. 31b. How do you know that they don't? Public speeches, outer activity and material help are all outweighed by the silence of the Mahatmas. They accomplish more than others. Now, the visitor comes to the practical point. Outer activity instead of inner quest. And Bhagavan rejects that viewpoint no less categorically. V. What can we do to ameliorate the condition of the world? B. If you remain free from pain, there will be no pain anywhere. The trouble now is due to your seeing the world outside yourself and thinking there is pain in it. But both the world and the pain are within you. If you turn inwards, there will be no pain. V. God is perfect. Why did he create the world imperfect? A work partakes of the nature of its author, but in this case it is not so. B. Are you something separate from God that you should ask this question? So long as you consider yourself the body, you see the world as external to you. It is to you that the imperfection appears. God is perfection and his work is also perfection, but you see it as imperfect because of your wrong identification with the body or the ego. V. Why did the self manifest as this miserable world? B. In order that you might seek it. Your eyes cannot see themselves, but if you hold a mirror in front of them, they see themselves. Creation is the mirror. See yourself first and then see the whole world as the self. V. Then what it amounts to is that I should always turn inwards. B. Yes. V. Shouldn't I see the world at all? 32b. You are not told to shut your eyes to the world, but only to see yourself first and then see the whole world as the self. If you consider yourself as the body, the world appears to be external. If you are the self, the world appears as Brahman manifested. Point 1. The trouble is that it is extremely difficult to regard the body or the objective world as unreal. Bhagavan admitted that in the following dialogue. D. I have a toothache. Is that only a thought? B. Yes. D. Then why can't I think that there is no toothache, and so cure myself? B. One does not feel the toothache when one is absorbed in other thoughts or when asleep. D. But still it remains. B. So strong is man's conviction of the reality of the world that it is not easily shaken off. But the world is no more real than the individual who sees it. Then a humorous exchange which illustrates the difficulty of the concept. D. At present there is a Sino-Japanese war going on. If it is only in the imagination, can or will Sri Bhagavan imagine it not to be going on and so put an end to it? B. Laughing, the Bhagavan of the questioner, whom the questioner sees as an external being, is as much a thought of his as the Sino-Japanese war. 2. Finally, a quotation which shows how Bhagavan sometimes answered on a more contingent plane, pointing out that it is 1t, 272, 2. T, 451. 33 Suffering that makes a man discontented with the life of the ego and spurs him on to seek self-realization. D. But why should there be suffering now? B. If there were no suffering, how could the desire to be happy arise? If that desire did not arise, how could the quest of the self arise? D. Then is all suffering good? B. Yes. What is happiness? Is it a healthy and handsome body, regular meals and so on? Even an emperor has endless troubles although he may be in good health. So all suffering is due to the false notion, I am the body. Getting rid of this is knowledge. Point 1. Sin and evil of every kind are the result of egoism unrestrained by consideration for the injury caused to others or the deleterious effect on the sinner's own character. Religions guard against them by moral and disciplinary codes and emotional appeals, seeking to keep the ego within bounds and prevent its trespassing into forbidden places. However, a spiritual path that is so radical and direct as to deny the ego itself does not need to attend specifically to the various excesses of egoism. All egoism has to be renounced. Therefore, non-duality turns the attack of the ego itself, not on its specific manifestations. However sinful a person may be, if he would stop wailing inconsolably, alas, I am a sinner. How shall I attain liberation? And, casting away even the thought that he is a sinner, if he would zealously carry on meditation on the self, he would most assuredly get reformed. Point 2. 1t, 633, 2. W, section 14. 34 Similarly, a discipline which aims at transcending thought completely, in realization of the super-rational self, does not need to inveigh specifically against evil thoughts. All thoughts are distractions. An European lady asked whether good thoughts were not helpful in seeking realization, at any rate in the early stages, like the lower rungs of the ladder, and was told, yes, insofar as they keep off bad thoughts, but they themselves must disappear before the state of realization. Point 1. Because the quality of purity, sattva, is the real nature of the mind, clearness like that of the unclouded sky is the characteristic of the mind expanse. Being stirred up by the quality of activity, rajas, the mind becomes restless and, influenced by darkness, tamas, manifests as the physical world. The mind thus becoming restless on the one hand and appearing as solid matter on the other, the real is not discerned. Just as fine silk threads cannot be woven with the use of a heavy iron shuttle, or the delicate shades of a work of art be distinguished in the light of a lamp flickering in the wind, so is realization of truth impossible with the mind rendered gross by darkness, tamos, and restless by activity, rajas. Because truth is exceedingly subda and serene, mind will be cleared of its impurities only by a desireless performance of duties during several births, getting a worthy master, learning from him and incessantly practicing meditation on the Supreme. The transformation of the mind into the world of inert matter due to the quality of darkness, tamas, and its restlessness due to the quality of activity, rajas, will cease. Then the mind regains its subtlety and composure. The bliss of the self can manifest only in a mind rendered subtle and steady by assiduous meditation. He who experiences that bliss is liberated even while still alive. Point 2. 1t, 341, 2. SE, Section 11. 35. He did, of course, insist on the need for purity. Sometimes a visitor would complain that he was too weak to resist his lower tendencies and would simply be told to try harder. According to his temperament, he might be told to find who it is that has the lower tendencies, or to trust in God. D. I am a sinner and do not perform any religious duties. Shall I have a painful rebirth because of that? B. Why do you say you are a sinner? Faith in God is enough to save you from rebirth. Cast all your burden on him. In the Tiruvachakam it is said, though I am worse than a dog, you have graciously undertaken to protect me. The delusion of death and birth is maintained by you. Is it for me to sit and judge? Am I the Lord here? Almighty God, it is for you to roll me through many bodies, or keep me fixed at your feet. Therefore have faith and that will save you. Point 1. D. There is more pleasure in meditation than in sensual enjoyment, and yet the mind seeks the latter and not the former. Why is that? B. Pleasure and pain are only aspects of the mind. Our essential nature is happiness, but we have forgotten the self and imagine that the body or the mind is the self. It is this wrong identification that gives rise to misery. What is to be done? This tendency is very deep-rooted and has continued for many past births, and so has grown strong. It will have to go before the essential nature, which is happiness, can be realized. Point 2. And above all, not to create new vasanas or latent tendencies. D. Swami, how can the grip of the ego be loosened? B. By not adding new vasanas, bad habits, to. Point 3. 1t, 30, 2. T, 540, 3. T, 173. 36. If the objective reality of the world be an illusion, then the evil in it is also an illusion, and the remedy is to turn inwards to the reality of the self. An American visitor, the secretary of Swami Yogananda, asked why there are good and evil in the world and was told, they are relative terms. There must be a subject to know the good and evil. That subject is the ego. It ends in the self. Or, you can say that the source of the ego is God. This definition is probably more definite and understandable for you. Point 1. Cod superficially, it might seem that the Maharshi's statements about God were inconsistent, since he would sometimes enjoin complete faith and submission to God and sometimes speak of God as unreal, but actually there was no inconsistency. It must always be remembered that the purpose of his exposition was not to propound a philosophy but to give practical guidance on the spiritual path. Someone who could conceive of the non-dual self could understand that it was his own self and the self of God and of the world also, whereas one who clung to the apparent reality of his ego could understand the self only as the God who had created him. According to their needs, he explained. In this, as in other matters, he pointed out the uselessness of discussion. Following either path was useful, theorizing about them was not. All religions postulate the three fundamentals: the world, the soul and God, but it is the one reality that manifests itself as these three. One can say, the three are really three, only so long as the ego lasts. Therefore to inhere in one's own being, when the ego is dead, is the perfect state. T. 106, 1. 37. The world is real. No, it is mere illusory appearance. The world is conscious. No, the world is happiness. No, what use is it to argue thus? That state is agreeable to all wherein, having given up the objective outlook, one knows oneself and loses all notions either of unity or duality, of oneself and the ego. If one has form oneself, the world and God will also appear to have form. But if one is formless, who is to see these forms, and how? Without the eye can any object be seen? The seeing self is the eye, and that eye is the eye of infinity. 1. Brahman is not to be seen or known. It is beyond the threefold relationship of seer, sight and seen, or knower, knowledge and known. The reality remains ever as it is. The existence of ignorance or the world is due to our illusion. Neither knowledge nor ignorance is real. What lies beyond them, as beyond all other pairs of opposites, is the reality. It is neither light nor darkness but beyond both, though we sometimes speak of it as light and of ignorance as its shadow. Point 2. When there was genuine search for understanding, Bhagavan would explain in some details, always leading the seeker back to the doctrine of the one self. Mr. Thompson, a very quiet young gentleman who has been staying in India for some years and studying Hindu philosophy as an earnest student, asked, Srimad Bhagavad Gita says, I am the prop for Brahman. In another place it says, I am in the heart of each one. Thus the different aspects of the ultimate principle are revealed. I take it that there are three aspects, namely, 1. The transcendental, 2. The immanent, and 3. The cosmic. Is realization to be in any of these or in all of 1 FV, 2-4, 2. DD, page 250. 38. Them, coming to the transcendental from the cosmic, Vedanta discards the names and forms as being Maya. Again Vedanta also says that the whole is Brahman, as illustrated by gold and ornaments of gold. How are we to understand the truth? B. The Gita says, Brahmano hi pratishtaham. If that aham is known, the whole is known. D. That is the immanent aspect only. B. You now think that you are an individual. Outside you there is the universe and beyond the universe is God. So there is the idea of separateness. The idea must go. For God is not separate from you or the cosmos. The Gita also says, I am the Self, O Gudakesa, seated in the heart of all beings. I am the beginning and the middle and also the end of all beings. 1. Thus God is not only in the heart of all, he is the prop of all. He is the source of all, their abiding place and their end. All proceed from him, have their stay in him, and finally resolve into him. Therefore he is not separate. D. How are we to understand the line in the Gita? This whole cosmos forms a particle of me. B. It does not mean that a small particle of God separates from him and forms the universe. His Shakti is acting, and as a result of one phase of such activity the cosmos has become manifest. Similarly the statement in Purusha Sukta, Padasya Viswabhutani, all beings form one of his parts, does not mean that Brahman is in 4 parts. D. I understand that. Brahman is certainly not divisible. B. So the fact is that Brahman is all and remains indivisible. He is ever realized. However, man does not know this, and it is just what he has to know. Knowledge means overcoming the obstacles which obstruct the revelation of the Bhagavad Gita. X. 20. 1. 39 Eternal truth that the self is the same as Brahman. The obstacles taken altogether form your idea of separateness as an individual. Therefore the present attempt will result in the truth being revealed that the self is not separate from Brahman. 1. Christians, except for the greatest mystics, cling to the idea of a permanently real and separate ego. Sri Bhagavan had a discussion on this point with a Jesuit father, but it remained inconclusive, Bhagavan trying to turn the father's mind inwards to self-enquiry and the father demanding a theoretical exposition instead. Dr. Emil Gauthier, S.J., professor of philosophy at the Sacred Heart College, Shenbaganur, Kodaikanal, asked, Can you kindly give me a summary of your teachings? B. They are found in the booklets, particularly in Huam PD. I shall read them, but may I have the central point of your teaching from your own lips? B. The central point is just the thing. D. It is not clear to me what you mean by that. B. That you should find the center. D. I come from God. Isn't God distinct from me? B. Who asks this question? God does not. You do. So find who you are and then you may find out whether God is distinct from you. D. But God is perfect and I am imperfect. How can I ever know him fully? B. God does not say so. It is you who ask the question. After finding out who you are, you may know what God is. D. But you have found yourself. Please let us know if God is distinct from you. T. 649. I. 40b. It is a matter of experience. Each one must experience it for himself. D. Oh, I see. God is infinite and I am finite. I have a personality which can never merge into God. Isn't that so? B. Infinity and perfection do not admit of parts. If a finite being is apart from infinity, the perfection of infinity is marred. Thus your statement is a contradiction in terms. D. No. C. There is both God and creation. B. How are you aware of your personality? D. I have a soul. I know it by its activities. B. Did you know it in deep sleep? D. The activities are suspended in deep sleep. B. But you exist in sleep and you do now too. Which of these two is your real state? D. Sleep and waking are mere accidents. I am the substance behind the accidents. He looked up at the clock and said that it was time for him to catch the train. He left after thanking Sri Bhagavan. So the conversation ended abruptly. Point 1. The following talk takes up various problems which plague philosophers and theologians: divine omniscience and free will, natural laws and divine activity, personal God and impersonal, and yet the tone of the answer shows that Bhagavan considers it of rather secondary importance. D. What is the relation between my free will and the overshadowing might of the omnipotent? A. Is the omnipotence of God consistent with the ego's free will? B. Is the omniscience of God consistent with the ego's free will? C. Are natural laws consistent with God's free will? T. 602. I. 41b. Yes. Free will is the present appearing to a limited faculty of sight and will. That same ego sees its past activity as falling into a course of law or rules, its own free will being one of the links in the course of law. The omnipotence and omniscience of God are then seen by the ego to have acted through the appearance of his own free will. So he comes to the conclusion that the ego must go by appearances. Natural laws are manifestations of God's will and they have been laid down. Point 1. The following dialogue is characteristic as showing refusal to discuss theory and insistence on the need for practice. D. Is God personal? B. Yes, he is always the first person, the I, ever standing before you. Because you give precedence to worldly things, God appears to have receded to the background. If you give up all else and seek him alone, he will remain as the I, the self. D. The final state of realization is said, according to Advaita, to be absolute union with the divine, and according to Visishtadvaita a qualified union, while Dvaita maintains that there is no union at all. Which of these should be considered the correct view? B. Why speculate about what will happen at some time in the future? All are agreed that the I exists. To whichever school of thought he may belong, let the earnest seeker first find out what the I is. Then it will be time enough to know what the final state will be, whether the I will get merged in the Supreme Being or stand apart from him. Let us not forestall the conclusion, but keep an open mind. D. But will not some understanding of the final state be a helpful guide even to the aspirant? T. 28. 1. 42b. No purpose is served by trying to decide now what the final state of realization will be. It has no intrinsic value. D. Why not? B. Because you proceed on a wrong principle. Your conclusion is arrived at by the intellect, which shines only by the light it derives from the self. Is it not presumptuous on the part of the intellect to sit in judgment over that from which it derives its little light? How can the intellect, which can never reach the self, be competent to ascertain and much less decide the nature of the final state of realization? It is like trying to measure the sunlight at its source by the standard of the light given by a candle. The wax will melt down before the candle comes anywhere near the sun. Instead of indulging in mere speculation, devote yourself here and now to the search for the truth that is ever within you. 1. Sometimes questions were also asked about the multiple gods of Hinduism. In this connection, it should be explained that Hindus, like Christians or Muslims, worship the one God. Some of the questions about God recorded above were put by Hindus. However, they also worship God manifested in various forms, one possibility or name or form or viewpoint not negating another. D. Why are so many gods mentioned? B. The body is only one, but how many functions are performed by it? The source of all these functions is one. It is the same with the gods. Point 2. It would sometimes be asked whether the various gods and their heavens were real. But such a question starts from the presumption of the reality of this physical world and the questioner's body, a presumption which Bhagavan would 1 mg, pp. 44-5, 2. T. 371. 43 not admit. Instead, he would turn this question, like all others, to the quest for reality. D. Are the gods, Ishvara and Vishnu, and their heavens, Kailas and Vaikuntha, real? B. As real as you are in this body? D. I mean, have they got a phenomenal existence like my body, or are they pure fictions like the horns of a hare? B. They do exist. D. If so, they must be somewhere. Where are they? B. In you. D. Then they are only my idea, something which I create and control. B. Everything is. D. But I can create a pure fiction like the horns of a hare, or a partial truth, like a mirage, while there are also facts which exist irrespective of my imagination. Do the gods, Ishvara and Vishnu, exist like that? A. Yes. D. Is God subject to cosmic dissolution at the end of a cycle? B. Why should he be? A man who realizes the self transcends cosmic dissolution and is liberated. Why should not Ishvara, God, who is infinitely wiser and abler than a man? D. Do gods and devils also exist? B. Yes. D. How are we to conceive of supreme divine consciousness? B. As that which is. 1. Particularly interesting are the questions asked by a Muslim professor about the hymns which Bhagavan wrote to God in the form of Arunachala. T. 30I. 44d. I have been reading the 5 hymns. I find that the hymns are addressed by you to Arunachala. But you are a non-dualist, so how can you address God as a separate being? B. The devotee, God and the hymns are all the self. D. But you are addressing God. You are specifying this Arunachala hill as God. B. You can identify the self with the body, so why shouldn't the devotees identify the self with Arunachala? D. If Arunachala is the self, why should it be specifically picked out among so many other hills? God is everywhere. Why do you specify him as Arunachala? B. What has attracted you from Allahabad to this place? What has attracted all these people around? D. Sri Bhagavan. B. How was I attracted here? By Arunachala. The power cannot be denied. Again, Arunachala is within and not without. The self is Arunachala. D. Several terms are used in the holy books. Atman, Paramatman, Para, etc. What is the gradation among them? B. They mean the same to the user of the words, but they are understood differently by various persons according to their development. D. But why do you use so many words to mean the same thing? B. It depends on the circumstances. They all mean the self. Para means not relative, or beyond the relative, that is to say the absolute. Point 1. Bhagavan would often make remarks, which the superficial critic might take to be agnostic or atheistic, just as has been done by superficial critics of the Buddha. For instance, he might say, T. 273. 1. 45. Why worry about God? We do not know whether God exists, but we know that we exist, so first concentrate on yourself. Find out who you are. There was no agnosticism, since Bhagavan, like the Buddha, spoke from perfect knowledge. He was simply placing himself in the position of the questioner and advising him to concentrate rather on what he knew than what he merely believed in. Sometimes he would tell people not to trouble whether there is God or whether realization implies unity with God or not, but simply to strive to realize the self, and when that was achieved they would know. Theorizing about it would not help them. The Malayalam version of Ulladu Narpadu, 40 verses, was read out by a devotee for the benefit of a visitor. After hearing it, the latter asked, what about the reference to duality during one's effort and unity at the end? 1b. It refers to people who think one must begin one's spiritual striving with a dualistic idea. They say that there is God and that one must worship and meditate until ultimately the individual merges into God. Others say that the individual and the Supreme Being always remain separate and never merge. But let's not worry now about what happens at the end. All agree that the individual exists now. So let a man discover it that is discover his self. There will be time enough afterwards to find out whether the self is to merge in the Supreme or is a part of it or remains separate. Let us not forestall the conclusion. Keep an open mind, dive within and find the self. The truth will dawn upon you all right, so why try to decide beforehand whether it is absolute or qualified unity or duality? There is no meaning in doing so. Your decision would have to be made by FV 37, I. 46 logic and intellect, but the intellect derives its light from the self, the highest power, so how can its reflected and partial light envisage the entire and original light? The intellect cannot attain to the self, so how can it ascertain its nature? One while explaining to an American lady, Bhagavan said, the self alone is real. All else is unreal. The mind and intellect have no existence apart from you. The Bible says, be still and know that I am God. Stillness is the only thing needed to realize that I am, is God. Later he added, the whole Vedanta is contained in the two biblical statements, I am that I am, and, be still and know that I am God. Point 2. For one who found self-enquiry too difficult, he would recommend worship and submission. D. What should one think of when meditating? B. What is meditation? It is the suspension of thoughts. You are perturbed by thoughts which rush one after another. Hold on to one thought so that others are expelled. Continuous practice gives the necessary strength of mind to engage in meditation. Meditation differs according to the degree of advancement of the seeker. If one is fit for it, one can hold directly to the thinker, and the thinker will automatically sink into his source, which is pure consciousness. If one cannot directly hold on to the thinker, one must meditate on God, and in due course the same individual will have become sufficiently pure to hold on to the thinker and sink into the absolute being. Point 3. 1t. 63, 2. t. 338, 3. t. 453, 47. In case the path of worship was chosen, he demanded absolute surrender. D. God is described as manifest and unmanifest. As the former, he is said to include the world as a part of his being. If that is so, we, as part of the world, should find it easy to know him in his manifested form. B. Know yourself before you seek to know the nature of God and the world. D. Does knowing myself imply knowing God? B. Yes, God is within you. D. Then, what stands in the way of my knowing myself or God? B. Your wandering mind and perverted ways. D. I am a weak creature. But why does not the superior power of the Lord within remove the obstacles? B. Yes, he will, if you have the aspiration. D. Why should he not create the aspiration in me? B. Then surrender yourself. D. If I surrender myself, is no prayer to God necessary? B. Surrender itself is a mighty prayer. D. But is it not necessary to understand